welcome to Read This Author's Corner. I am your host, Alice Maria, and today we are going into the future in the mind of Jordan Hampton and his futuristic novels. Welcome, Jordan. Jordan, I am so excited to have you and talk about all your projects because you have multiple books. And I before we jump into all the great work and creativity that you're putting out in the world, I would love for our audience to learn a little bit about you. So would you mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely. First, let me say that I am so happy to be here. I feel like it's a great honor to be invited onto this podcast to talk about all of the wonderful things that make me excited and as of yet don't make anybody else excited. But I am ready. I am kind of a jack of all trades and a master of still a lot. I have 2 English degrees from Grand Canyon University in education. I've been a high school educator for the last 8 years, but I'm making the switch to adjunct teaching at a college level starting this fall. And I'm going to be an admissions counselor at a college. In my spare time, I do 700-year-old samurai swordsmanship. I study languages. I create languages. And of course, I write, which is the whole reason why I'm here.
I am a creative. I worked in the fashion industry for 40 years. When I meet creative people with multiple facets of creativity, I'm all in. I'm not I'm not one of those, some people are like, oh my gosh, you're doing too much. I'm like, no, give it all to me. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So yeah, I am your biggest cheerleader because we're in the same boat.
I'm glad to have you.
You say you write languages. I found that so fascinating when I was going through your book. But before we go there, but that is fascinating, and we do have to talk about that. So what I read your about the author's page, and you have one of the best about the author's page I have ever read. It is so impactful, and it just speaks to exactly what you want to put out in the world. Talk to me about that. Let's talk about how you see yourself, because I really feel that that's important for people to understand who you are before we start talking about the intricacies of the work you do.
Well, in my About the Author, I pretty much call myself 2 things, chiefly, to shorten it down for the sake of time. One of those things is somebody who is all in for culture. I love learning about different cultures. When I was teaching at the high school level, I made it a priority to highlight multicultural literature for my students because it's important for them as they get ready to go into the world that they understand what the world outside of their hometown looks like and outside of their home country and outside of their home hemisphere and so on and so forth. But I also list myself as kind of a threat because I am a well-educated Black man who is dedicated to fiercely interrogating all of the social constructs that continue to belittle all of those different cultures. And so I already know there's a group of people who's not going to like me. I don't care. I'm not writing to them. Okay, I am sort of writing to them or writing about them enough to make them want to look at it, if for no other reason than to get them looking at it too. But I, as an educator, as an author, I've seen 2 things happen in the 2020s that I am not okay with. And that is, first and foremost, an attempted restriction on education, on literature. Like, we've got politicians quoting Hitler, but banning books. That doesn't seem logical to me. In fact, it seems like the beginning of every single dystopian science fiction fantasy novel that has come out in the last 60 years. And the other thing that I've seen is this opposition to all things diverse. Unironically, the same group of people rages about critical race theory, which they don't understand. They want to. they have appropriated the word woke to mean something other than what the Black community created it to mean, and have since used it as kind of a demonizing term. But that tends to happen when Black people come up with slang words that challenge the Anglo-centric power structure a little bit too much. You got a whole lot of people bending the knee to make those people comfortable. And then there's me, who is going to throw as much shade and say stuff out in the open as much as I need to in order to get people to wake up. Respectfully.
The other part of what you had written is the Black excellence beyond entertainment. That was the quote that I was trying to get back. It's no shade at entertainment. It's just that's the only thing that we tend to get portrayed as entertainers, be it sports or music. So I did like that quote a lot. You have multiple futuristic books. So talk to me a little bit about where your interest in futurism stems from. Let's start there.
Well, my mom always accused me of never being in the moment, never being present, because I'm always thinking about what could happen, what will happen, how does this affect this way off in the distance. And so I guess you could say that futurism is just a part of my personality because that's where I am. Like, even like as a 12-year-old, I had 30 different plans to succeed in the future. And some of them, like, they were very detailed plans too. Like, some of them included how I was going to behave as a husband and a father, and some of them included how I was going to behave as a solo act should that never happen. So, like, I was spiderwebbing.
You're a planner, boy.
Yep. Which is weird because I don't actually plan when I write. I just go off the dome. But it was 2020 when I started writing Ignition 2084. Well, I guess the Ignition 2084 storyline, because I didn't actually finish the story until last year when, and then I published the sequel, Eruption 2085. But it was 2020 when the idea came to me. And, you know, it was around the time of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. COVID was running rampant throughout the nation. We had political intrigue in ways that nobody should ever have political intrigue. It's just embarrassing politicians on both sides, on all sides, really. We had a lot of clowns try and take power. And you know, we heard a whole lot of discourse about these things, race relations, disease management, politics, and it didn't seem like we were having an educated discourse at all. It was a nationwide shouting match about things that were literally life and death, but nobody wanted to acknowledge it as such in any way that things could get done. So taking a page out of, you know, the classic authors' books, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to throw a temper tantrum on the page. I'm going to go off. And so Ignition 2084 begins with America no longer exists. The White House is a heap of ruins, and there are two opposing forces, one of which is the freedom fighters, who look like very diverse groups, not just people of color, white people too, because it's not so easy to just categorize this as a people of color versus white people issue when there have been numerous white people to support people of color in their fight for civil rights.
Exactly.
And so it's basically those who understand the chaos and trauma that racism and other forms of prejudice cause versus those who are dogmatically in favor of the old regime. And so the point of the book is, or those books, plural, is to kind of dissect America and remove the concept of America from the equation. If the country that houses those social issues no longer exists, will we still have those social issues, and will it be easier to manage? No, it won't. But I at least want people to think about that, because I don't want to say we slow, but when it comes to handling things in a way that would create lasting change, we are very quick to put a Band-Aid on it. And then we come back 10, 15, 60 years later, like, wait, it didn't work?
Funny you say that, because I was just venting to myself, like when you hear of all of this electric vehicles, electric this, and then you see what is going on to get the materials in order to create that. I'm like, how is that different than the gasoline? How is that different than getting oil? So the Band-Aid is to do this now and kick the can down the road for somebody else to figure out that, oh yeah, that wasn't going to work. So yeah, I hear where you're coming from.
If my sarcasm and my shade is a little too much, let me know. I will try my best to dial it back. But honestly, after Representative Crockett and that that bleach blonde, bad built, butch body thing, I feel all kinds of empowered and a little incensed.
Okay, so America doesn't exist. So the country that housed the ideals no longer exists. So is it easier to manage? Now, that's a profound thought process to say, okay, if we took America out of the equation, it's no longer about the government or the politics of it. It's still, you still have the same people.
Yep.
Is that what it boils down to, right?
Yep. Same people fighting over the same stuff, whether or not it is a political statement or just a fact of life to say that Black lives matter, or that Asian lives matter, or that trans lives matter, or anything else that you know is a hotly contested topic in the political sphere right now, that is just a simple matter of fact to people like us.
Okay, so that was Ignition, and then the second one
is a continuation.
Is a continuation. This is Living Without America. This is living in with the people that now occupy the space that used to be America. Wow.
And it does a lot more than just interrogate the politics of the 2020s. It also, I have 4 different factions, 3 of which are freedom fighters doing their own version of freedom fighting and not really coordinating with the others, and then 1 who is simply just the America of old, but rebranded. And, you know, of course, it wouldn't be a dystopian novel if we didn't jump to the absolute worst case scenario with it. So they're horrible. Like, it's a dramatization of every horrible thing that we've seen in 2020 and beyond. Both past and present. But I also come from a military background. My mom served 20 years in the Army, and so I got to experience her deployments, and I got to see my fair share of veterans coming back with severe psychological and emotional trauma from the things that they saw or did while they were deployed. And so while we're interrogating the treatment of people of color, I also wanted to shine a little light on how veterans are treated. So we have the challenges of war, the concept of war heroes versus war being an evil that affects both sides equally. I tried my best to humanize my more racist characters because nobody is born a racist. People are taught to be racist. People are taught to spew their vitriol. And so at key points throughout the story between both books, you see characters come to realization, wait, they're people too. They have thoughts and feelings just like I do. They have ideals that they're defending just like I am. But wait a second, my ideal solely says that they are pretty much the devil and they should be eliminated. How did we get here?
Right. Which is very valid, you know, and until everybody is willing. But that's the point. You have to be willing to open up to see a different standpoint, right?
Fronted by some undeniable fact, like a friend of mine from college used to say that with the people he didn't care for too much, he would always he would give the baby test. And in his head, what that was like, did he think they were so evil that, or so
They were never
despicable,
babies.
or so irredeemable that if a baby was in danger, they wouldn't rescue the baby? And so it was his way of humanizing literally everyone he came across, because he didn't ever come to a conclusion like this person is so horrible that they wouldn't save a baby in danger, or that they were so evil that they would further endanger the baby. And so I thought about that, and I thought about, you know, that military background that I told you about, and I combined them. We don't just have, you know, these full-fledged adults that are fighting on the battlefield. We have families who are both fighting and waiting for their loved ones who are fighting to return. And we have multiple moments throughout the narrative where people on opposite sides get to see these people with their families, and they get to see the real time implications of every horrible thing that they do in the name of their country, in the name of their ideals, in the name of their freedom.
Wow. Wow. Because quite often, if you, especially here in America, if you make a criticism, it's quite often thought as that you're unpatriotic, when a lot of the people that make comments, they make comments with close family members serving, you know. So it's never about not being patriotic, but saying that what we've invested, we're not seeing the full returns on that investment.
Yep. And it's definitely something that I have had a lot of time to think about, because while people are openly disputing whether or not Black Lives Matter, my mother, who also has a Black life, went to Iraq and Qatar. She deployed twice, defending the Constitution that gives people the right to say that her life ultimately does not matter. So it's just little things like that. Well, I wouldn't say that that's a little thing, but it's stuff like that that I think about, that people who are opposed to the ideal or opposed to the statement have the luxury to not think about. And I wanted to highlight that, like, this may be optional for you, but this is my life.
I love the fact that you are sharing the perspective from which you came, because someone could hear the first part of what we started talking about and how passionate you are about, you know, how you want things to be seen, and never realize that this is rooted in the child of somebody that is serving and knows that my parent could actually pay the ultimate sacrifice for you to say horrible and mean things against me, because that's the Constitution. So that's a pretty powerful statement that you've made there, that, you know, I see where that is a jarring position to be in, you know. And then those same people say, but no, we have the right to speak, but then you don't have the right to read about your history because that offends us.
Yeah, that's very true. I joked recently with an old family friend about how the reason why I left teaching was because it got so challenging, because my existence is a political statement, whether I want it to be or not. And we just so happen to be in a time where it's not the most popular political statement. And so this is coming off of teaching Fahrenheit 451 and Night, two stories that really interrogate, or really have a close and personal dissection of the concepts of censoring information and controlling which minorities can versus cannot be heard from, when all of the voices coming together in the social stratum are what makes society hold together. Yes. Like, it's very easy for me as an English teacher and I guess kind of a personal historian, because I'm not an actual history major or history mind, but I love history. To see where the moment we restrict access to information surrounding specific groups of people the moment we start living in a dystopian world. And
Yes.
like I felt like the best thing that I could do was to educate students of that, teach them, of course, the stuff that's in the curriculum, but teach them what it's really saying and how to find out what something is really saying for themselves. So even if the government decides you can't do this anymore, they can still find a way forward.
And that's excellent. That is excellent. So you actually sent me a copy of a book that's not quite published yet.
I did.
Get too deep in the book, but what I found fascinating was that it had its own language and it had its own like alphabet, vocabulary. I was just so taken by that aspect of it, and I definitely wanted to tap into your brain to see how did that formulation come about.
It's actually pretty interesting because the language came first. I
Okay.
I was burnt out after doing Ignition and Eruption because both of those books, while they do have their fun moments and their entertaining moments, they are very heavy and they are very real for fictional novels. So I wanted something that was a little more laid back, but still accomplishes the things that I want to accomplish with my writing. So I thought about, every group of people on the American continent, no matter where they come from, can easily trace back to a language of their ancestors, a culture of their ancestors. But then I thought about myself and I'm like, wait a minute, I can't do that, not very easily. So I launched into a whole lot of research on the African continent, north, south, east, west, and central, because you always hear about Nigerian stories or South African stories or Kenyan stories, but you don't really get the Senegalese stories or the Guinea-Bissauan stories or the stories from the Congo or Chad or Sudan or Somalia. The only thing you hear about Somalia is that they got pirates, and honestly,
Yeah.
we got pirates here, but we won't talk about that. So I I was thinking about it so much and doing so much research on it that I ended up having a dream in a language that I didn't understand, and it sounded incredibly African. So I started putting it together, and I decided to go with a syllabary instead of an alphabet because I speak Japanese. And
Mhm.
so with Japanese, it's syllabic. So you have one character equals a whole sound, as opposed to
Mm.
English, where we have an alphabetic language, and by putting letters together, we create new sounds.
Sounds.
So it's easier to grasp, it's easier to put together, and you tend to have a little bit more flexibility with sentence structures, so you don't have to burn yourself out trying to make every sentence fit this form. And so uh, I'll never forget it. I was teaching argumentative essays at the time, and I turned my students loose. They were doing research and they were formulating their intro paragraphs and their first body paragraph. And while they were doing that, I was at the board waiting for questions, and I got bored with just sitting there not talking because I wasn't going to just distract them. So I start writing on the board all of the sounds that I wanted to use for this language and then the characters that go with this. And the kids were like, Mr. Hampton, are you okay? And in that split second, I had a choice. I could either assure them that everything was fine and I was just doing something creative, or I could lean into the fact that they thought I was having a nervous breakdown. And so instead of soothing their minds, the only thing I said was, Shh, I'm working. They were like, oh, okay then. So they sat back down and they continued to work until they had questions about the actual essay. And in about 2 hours, I had the whole 86 character syllabary. And so I kept developing over the course of a couple of months. And then I took an African ancestry DNA test to find out where in Africa my family comes from. And it's funny because I come from the Kapele, the Mende, the Mandinka, and the Fulani, from pretty much the entire coast of West Africa and a little bit Central Africa too. And like all of them were such multifaceted people with various different expressions of art and storytelling and warfare and politics and
You
agriculture
saw
and urban.
yourself.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, so it just runs in the family that I do too much. Okay. And so without really realizing it, I incorporated a lot of their more dominant elements into the cultures and societies that are in Uneshu, the continent that uh, this book focuses on. And so I decided that the language Jakado that's in that book is going to be the dominant magic system of this fantasy novel. So we get a glimpse into different African cultures that don't usually get their moment in the spotlight. We get one language that's built up of multiple different African languages, so it feels both new and familiar to people from the diaspora. And we get to highlight both African mythology in various different forms with that innate connection between language and spirituality that Black people just have in spades.
Wow. Wow. That's okay. Excellent. Well, I'm traveling pretty soon. I'll make sure I put that on my book to read. What is it that you want people to take away from your books, from this passion that you have? What is that lesson, or what is that thought process that you want people to take away?
Education and culture are invaluable. Those are that's the main thing, because whether it's Ignition and Eruption, where I'm a little angry I'm a little angry telling the story in those books. The Word of Uneshu does the exact same thing. It highlights Black culture in a way that isn't usually thought about, and it pulls in all kinds of things from across the diaspora. And I want something like, I want my work to show Black people as they are. We are often not given the best depictions. We get one or two every generation, and then the rest of them are pimps or prostitutes or basketball players or rappers or thugs on the street and so on and so forth. And I'm not saying that like the entertainment and sports avenues are inherently bad, but
that's how it's portrayed.
Get like 5 different examples of what Black people are capable of, and pretty soon everyone who isn't Black thinks that's all we have to offer.
Yes.
And we are so much more than that, and we have always been so much more than that. I recently did a rant about the perceptions of Black men and Black women, and how these negative perceptions came to be as a result of 1, the transatlantic slave trade, 2, Jim Crow segregation laws, and 3, the overcriminalization of Black men and the overall impoverished depiction of Black women from the 80s until the early 2000s.
What is I find very almost hilarious is that I remember in the 80s when, because I was like in my late teens, early 20s, and all Black women were welfare recipients, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had absolutely no redeeming quality for years, even decades. And then I remember when things start changing, and Black women are the most educated demographic in the country.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow that has still been switched to something negative.
Yep.
which is mind-boggling to me, is that you take a group of people that you have categorized one way, and they have said, okay, we'll show you, and they do everything in their power to change that perception, and they do it successfully, and you find a way to make the improved version just as negative as what they were coming away from.
Mhm.
I am that in and of itself has my mind blown.
It's
I shouldn't,
frustrating.
but it does.
Yeah, I feel like it does because it's 2024, and with all the progress that we've seen as a society, we're still on this. It it's not for me. The whole thing is still rooted in that, and it hasn't really gotten away from it. The practices of misogynoir started then by calling Black women inhuman, just like all other Black people. And when they were shown to be a bit human, that was automatically associated with masculinity. So you get to 2024, and the femininity of Black women and the humanity of Black women is still frequently and flagrantly denied. And whenever they do try and assert that education or that humanity or that femininity or any accomplishment whatsoever, you get people like Marjorie Taylor Greene who try to undercut all of that by commenting on lashes or their hair or their clothes or their accent or the words they choose to use instead of the substance of the statement behind them. And like I've been hearing people complain about Ms. Crockett's response to Greene, but they don't understand the deep racial implications of that entire exchange. She should not be vilified for defending herself and subsequently every other Black woman that hears their voices. She should be applauded for standing up for herself. Honestly, if I have a daughter in the near future, I truly hope that she has the audacity to do exactly that, because ain't no way my baby is going to grow up thinking that she is less than somebody.
Is there something that we did not cover that you didn't get to share that you would like for our audience to know?
Yes. So I am fiercely determined to impact our culture as a society with a positive, uh, with a positive image of Black culture. And I'm mostly excited about the Word of Uneshu coming out in the next few months to 2 years. I really don't know. I'm still looking for for a publisher for this, but I'll do it myself if nobody wants it. Because I think that it's very important to establish that connection back to our roots, to gift back, even if it's only fragmented bits and pieces of the culture that was beaten out of us when we came here against our will. I jokingly told my students and my martial arts teacher and my mom, but not really joking, I want the languages of this continent, the culture of this continent to be so impactful that we start speaking Jakarta to each other. We start making the dishes. We start going places dressed in the clothing of Uneshu. I want it to be so positively and unapologetically Black and so easy to mesh with that it just becomes us. Because I'm not about writing something that has all of this cultural influence and just for my own entertainment. I need the thing that's benefiting me to benefit people like me. Because I remember, I'm only 30 years old. I remember the transition between not being, or like wearing your natural hair not being acceptable practice as a professional to being applauded by people who may or may not actually have your best interests at heart on the job. Right. I remember deep-seated colorism within the Black community being a standard and a staple in our discourse slowly. And I remember watching it as it slowly starts to fade out. And I want this to be as much of a cultural impact as that. I want this to be the next advancement for Black people, not just in the US, but everywhere.
Well, wow. I truly want the same thing. I learned Greek and I learned about the Ming Dynasty. I learned about all of these things that there was nothing wrong with it, but after so many years of learning about everybody else's culture, I'm unapologetically in a space where I want to not learn about my culture, I want to breathe it in.
Yeah.
I want it to be my being, my essence. I thank you for being unapologetically you. And I thank you for wanting people to see us in the true essence of ourselves. So thank you for that.
I appreciate you giving me the space to. And as you were talking, I was thinking about how it's crazy that the negativity surrounding Black culture sells. But then I immediately checked myself. Just because something sells does not mean that it holds any value. And
Exactly.
I think that as a people, as a culture, as a civilization in the Western world, we need to unlearn the assumed value of the price tag and go for what has something that is truly enriching to offer.
Exactly. Being able to allow people to use our resources, our income, our intellect to sell us things that make us look like less than what we are. That's where we have to educate ourselves out of that. We can't
Yep.
expect anybody else to do that. We have to
Yep.
do that for ourselves.
Especially since they're trying to make it illegal for anyone else to educate us on us.
But I shared with someone the other day, I can't be overly upset about that. One, when you think that we were never the people that were supposed to benefit from education to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Two, the education is kind of geared towards what they said. Was it Rockefeller that what said I need more educated people to help me run factories? So education was birthed out of this kind of need for labor. So you want people that are able to follow directions and follow procedures. So when you think of those things and then you say, but I want you to teach me how to be better, the people that put the system in place, that was never their goal. So if we want something different for ourselves, if I want my house to be better, I have to stop looking for you to come over and fix my roof.
Mm-hmm.
I have to stop looking for you to come over and fix my fence. You have your own house, right? So how do we build our house? How do we fix our own fences? That's where I need for us to be. That if there's anything that I'm preaching is our ancestors just out of slavery started colleges. They educated themselves with no resources. Now we have people that are multi, triple millionaires, billionaires. What we could honestly do, like, I'm not blaming anybody for not knowing or embracing what they were taught. But there has to be a time when, like you find your way out to educate yourself on how do I improve what no one else is going to do for me. If I sit here and say, I want you to do, it ain't happening. It's not happening. We got to do it. We have to do it for ourselves. So when I heard what you were working on and I saw what you were doing, it was so important for me to just hear your voice, because that's what I'm saying is that I would love for everybody else to get on board, but I think they'll get on board when they see us being serious about making the changes that need to be done for ourselves. And that's my soapbox.
Well, all I can say is you are really going to love this book that isn't published yet, because all of that is kind of the plot line. But
So thank you so much for spending time with me and sharing your passion. I love the fact that you're passionate. I love the fact that you're an educated Black man trying to educate young Black children to be proud of who they are and be comfortable in their skin. That is awesome. We need that. We need so much of it. And I thank you for being you, and I thank you for doing what you do.
Well, thank you for having me.
Until we meet again. So we're going to have to do a deep dive when the other book come out.
Oh, yeah.
I actually think I would love to set up a book club around that and have a discussion groups, because that sounds like we're going to have to make that a movement.
Oh, you should invite me and tell nobody that I'm the author.
And good luck on the little one, and
Thank
your
you.
new career. All the best. I would like to thank my very special guest, author Jordan Hampton, for spending the time to share the creativity that is his imagination with his 3 books. Please check them out and pick up a copy. This has been Read This, Author's Corner. I am your host, Alice Maria. Keep reading, keep growing, and stay empowered.